Beneath the frost-kissed veil of a blood moon, her shadow bled into the snow like a forgotten vow. The wind howled through the jagged peaks of the Iron Fang Mountains, carrying the scent of pine and despair, as Alara stumbled forward, her bare feet numb against the unrelenting white. She had been cast out at midnight, the Pax Alpha's rejection still echoing in her ears like the crack of breaking bone. "Unworthy," he had snarled, his golden eyes cold as the blade that severed her from the bond. Omega blood, they called it. Too soft, too fragile for the wars that raged between the shifter clans and the shadowed courts beyond. But Alara knew the truth. Her visions, those fleeting glimpses of futures woven in silver thread, had foreseen his downfall. And Alphas did not forgive prophecies that threatened their thrones. Now, the world blurred into a haze of swirling flakes, each one a tiny dagger against her skin. Her breath came in ragged gasps, fogging the air before her like ghosts of unspoken pleas. The cloak she clutched, a tattered remnant of her mother's weaving, embroidered with lunar phases in faded thread, did little to ward off the chill that seeped into her bones. It was her only heirloom, this cloak, its edges frayed from years of hiding her quiet rebellions. Beneath it, her heart pounded a solitary rhythm, no longer synced to the pack's wild pulse. The forest gave way to steeper slopes, the trees thinning into skeletal sentinels that clawed at the starless sky. Alara's legs trembled, the exhaustion from days of flight catching up like a predator's jaws. She had run from the pack's heartland, evading the hunters sent to ensure her silence, her visions buried with her. But the mountains cared not for Omegas or Alphas. They devoured the weak without mercy. A sharp pain lanced through her side, and she collapsed to her knees, the snow swallowing her like a lover's grave. Her fingers dug into the frozen earth, seeking warmth that wasn't there, as tears froze on her lashes. In the distance, the wind carried something new. Not the familiar wee-woo of wolves, but a deeper, resonant hum, like the tolling of ancient bells muffled by stone. Alara lifted her head, her vision swimming. Through the veil of storm, she glimpsed spires piercing the night, black as obsidian against the crimson moon. The vampire court of Eldrath. Whispers from the pack elders had painted it as a realm of eternal night, where bloodlords ruled with fangs and forgotten magics, their wars spilling into shifter lands like ink on parchment. To seek refuge there was madness. Omegas were chattel there, or worse, sustenance for the undying. Yet madness was all she had left. Her body betrayed her then, the world tilting as darkness clawed at the edges of her sight. She crawled forward, the cloak trailing behind like a bloodied banner, its lunar threads catching the faint glow of torchlight from the court's distant walls. The cold seeped deeper, numbing her limbs, but a faint heat stirred within, a spark, unbidden, from the core of her being. Her visions had always come with fire, a inner blaze that Alphas feared, calling it witchcraft. Now it flickered weakly, whispering of shadows and salvation intertwined. The gates loomed closer, wrought iron twisted into the forms of bats and thorns, guarded by silent figures cloaked in midnight velvet. Ilara's strength ebbed, her palms pressing into the snow as she whispered a prayer to the goddess of the moon, the one who wove fates from silver and sorrow. "Let me not fade here," she breathed, her voice lost to the gale. But the snow claimed her fully then, her body curling into itself, the cloak a fragile shroud over her form. The world faded to echoes, the crunch of boots on frost, a low murmur like wind through crypts, and the metallic tang of blood on the air, her own, perhaps, or something far older. She did not see the guards approach, their eyes gleaming like polished garnets in the torchlight. Nor did she feel the rough hands that lifted her, the cloak slipping from her shoulders to reveal the pale curve of her neck, unmarked by mate or master. In the court's shadowed halls, where flames danced in sconces of carved bone, her arrival stirred the air like a prophecy fulfilled. But Alara dreamed only of fire and fangs, of a gaze that pierced the veil between life and the endless night. The prince's chambers overlooked the frozen courtyards, where the blood moon cast long shadows over the assembled nobles. Draven, heir to the Eldrath throne, stood at the arched window, his reflection a study in restrained fury. Pale skin stretched taut over high cheekbones, eyes the color of storm-tossed seas. He had returned from the border skirmishes weeks ago, his sword still bearing the stains of shifter blood, but victory tasted like ash. The alpha of the Ironfang pack had allied with rival bloodlords, betraying ancient pacts, and Draven's own court whispered of his softening resolve. Guilt gnawed at him, a wound deeper than any blade. The Omega he had once spared, years ago in a raid, now fueled the enemy's rage. Mercy, they called it weakness. A knock echoed, sharp as a heartbeat. His steward entered, face impassive. My lord, astray at the gates, an Omega collapsed in the snow, shifter sent but unmarked. Draven turned, his cloak of deep crimson swirling like spilled wine. Curiosity flickered, unbidden, mingling with the ever-present melancholy that shadowed his steps. Omegas were rare in these lands, their wild essence a curiosity to the undead. But this one, brought in on the cusp of dawn, felt like a thread pulled from the moon's own loom. "Bring her to the antechamber," he commanded, his voice a low rumble that silenced the room. As the steward bowed and retreated, Draven's fingers traced the ancient amulet at his throat, a silver crescent etched with runes of blood and binding, a relic from the court's founding, said to reveal true mates under the crimson sky. It warmed against his skin for the first time in centuries, a subtle pulse like a second heart. Outside, the snow fell thicker, burying the world in white silence, while within the court's veins, fate stirred awake. Alara awoke to the scent of aged stone and flickering torchlight, her body cradled in silken sheets that whispered against her skin like a forbidden caress. The air was heavy, laced with the metallic tang of blood and the faint underlying rot of eternity, nothing like the crisp pine of her mountain exile. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing a chamber vast as a crypt, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadows where silver veins of moonlight pierced through narrow slits. She lay on a canopied bed draped in velvet the color of midnight, her tattered cloak folded neatly at its foot, the lunar threads glowing faintly as if breathing. Panic surged through her veins, hot and instinctive, chasing away the numbness of the snow. She bolted upright, her muscles protesting with a deep ache, the remnants of frostbite stinging her fingers. Where was she? The vampire court. The realization crashed over her like an avalanche. Tales from the pack had warned of these halls, labyrinths of fang and forgotten oaths, where the undead feasted on the warmth of the living. Omegas like her were playthings or prey, their blood a rare vintage savored in crystal goblets under the blood moon. Her hand flew to her throat, expecting the bite of chains, but found only smooth skin, unmarked. A soft robe of deep burgundy had been draped over her, its fabric cool and alien against her fevered flesh. She swung her legs over the bed's edge, bare feet meeting the chill of polished marble veined with obsidian. The room spun slightly, her vision stirring at the edges of her mind, fragments of crimson eyes and a crown of thorns. But she shoved them down, focusing on the door of carved ebony, guarded by a single sentinel in shadowed armor. Before she could rise further, the door creaked open, admitting a figure that stole the breath from her lungs. He moved with the lethal grace of a predator born to the night, his presence filling the chamber like smoke from a sacred pyre. Tall and broad-shouldered, clad in a tunic of black leather etched with silver runes, he was no mere guard. His hair fell in dark waves to his shoulders, framing a face carved from marble. High cheekbones, a jaw shadowed with stubble, and eyes that burned with the stormy gray of gathering tempests. Draven, she knew without knowing, the name surfacing from the pack's whispered fears. The vampire prince of Eldrath, heir to a throne built on rivers of blood. He paused at the threshold, his gaze locking onto hers with an intensity that pinned her in place. It was not hunger she saw there, not the feral gleam of the stories, but something fractured, guilt etched into the faint lines around his mouth, a melancholy that mirrored her own exile. The amulet at his throat caught the torchlight, its silver crescent pulsing with an inner warmth, as if alive with secrets. Alara's heart stuttered, an instinctive pull tugging at her core, like the moon calling to the tide. She recoiled inwardly, denying it. Vampires were monsters, thieves of life, not saviors from the storm. "You awaken?" he said, his voice a low timbre that resonated through the stone, carrying the weight of centuries. He stepped closer, not advancing, but halting at a respectful distance, his hands visible and empty. "The snow nearly claimed you at our gates. Rest was needed." Alara's throat tightened, words forming like shards of ice. "Why bring me here? You're kind. You take what you want." Fear laced her tone, but beneath it curiosity flickered, unbidden. His scent enveloped her, aged leather, faint iron, and something warmer, like embers banked against the cold. It stirred memories of pack fires, twisted now into this undead realm. Draven's expression softened, a shadow crossing his features. Not all wants are taken by force. He gestured to a side table laden with a silver tray, bread steaming with warmth, a goblet of deep red wine that smelled of summer berries, not blood. "Eat. You've strength enough to flee if you choose, though the dawn approaches, and the mountains offer no mercy to the weary." She hesitated, her eyes darting to the cloak. Its lunar phases seemed to watch her, a symbol of the goddess's indifferent gaze. Hunger gnawed at her, but trust was a luxury she'd lost with her pack. Yet his eyes held no deception, only that quiet storm, as if he too wandered paths of isolation. The connection hummed between them, instinctive and raw, a thread of shared solitude, born from her fear of fangs and his unspoken burdens. She rationalized it away, survival's illusion, nothing more. Rising slowly, she approached the table, her fingers brushing the goblet's rim. The wine's aroma was intoxicating, chasing the chill from her limbs. Draven watched, unmoving, the amulet's glow syncing with the rhythm of her pulse. Outside, the wind howled against the spires, carrying distant uivu from the wilds, a reminder of the wars brewing beyond these walls. Shifter alphas plotted with rival bloodlords, betrayals weaving through the night like thorns. "Why me?" she whispered, sipping the wine, its warmth spreading like forbidden fire. "An omega at your door, I'm no prize for a prince." His lips curved in a bittersweet smile, shadowed by regret. "Perhaps not. But the moon brought you, and in Eldrath. We heed its call." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken prophecy. Alara felt the pull deepen, curiosity edging out fear, even as she denied the spark igniting in her chest. He was wounded. She sensed it. The guilt of past mercies, the weight of a crown that demanded blood for peace. As the first hints of dawn bled purple through the slits, a rumble echoed from the halls below. Armored footsteps, urgent murmurs of border scouts. Draven's gaze sharpened, the melancholy yielding to resolve. "Refuge is yours for now, but the night holds enemies for us both." Alara clutched the goblet tighter, the cloak's threads whispering against her skin. In that moment, under the flickering torches, the divide between shifter and vampire blurred, curiosity blooming into something perilously like alliance. Yet denial lingered, a shield against the storm within. "And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you." The chamber's heavy door sealed with a resonant thud, sealing out the encroaching dawn and the murmurs of the court below. Alara stood frozen, the goblet still clutched in her trembling hand, its warmth seeping into her palm like a hesitant promise. Draven's words lingered in the air, thick as the scent of smoldering incense from the sconces. Refuge, he had offered. But in this labyrinth of stone and shadow, refuge felt like a silken noose. Her pulse thrummed against her ribs, a wild shifter rhythm clashing with the undead stillness that cloaked him. She wanted to flee, to bolt into the purpled light filtering through the slits. But her body betrayed her, rooted by the invisible thread that hummed between them, pulling taut with every shared glance. Draven turned toward the window, his silhouette etched against the fading stars, the silver crescent amulet at his throat catching a stray beam of moonlight like a captive star. It mirrored the lunar embroidery on her cloak, folded now on the bed. A coincidence or the goddess's wry jest? Ilara's fingers itched to reclaim it, to wrap its frayed edges around her like armor against this stranger's gaze. He was no savior. His kind drank life as casually as wine, yet in his eyes she saw fractures, guilt carved deep, like the scars hidden beneath his tunic from battles fought in the name of fragile peace. Empathy stirred unbidden, a soft ache in her chest, born from her own banishment. What wounds did a prince carry? That mercy seemed both his sin and his salvation. Before she could voice the question burning on her tongue, the rumble from the halls swelled into chaos, armored boots pounding like thunder, shouts laced with urgency slicing through the stone. Draven's body tensed, his hand drifting instinctively to the hilt of a dagger sheathed at his belt, its pommel wrought in the shape of a thorned rose. "Stay here," he murmured, voice low and edged with steel, but his eyes met hers again, holding a flicker of something raw, concern, perhaps, or the ghost of protectiveness long buried. The door burst open, admitting a scout clad in frost-rimed leather, his face pale as bone, breath ragged from the cold. "My lord, the borders, shifters breach the eastern pass. Iron Fang Alphas, allied with Lord Vesper's fangs. They carry torches and steel, howling for the Omega Stray. Word spreads, she's the seer who foresaw their Alpha's fall." Ilara's blood turned to ice, colder than the snow that had nearly entombed her. The pack, her pack once, had tracked her here, their rejection twisting into vengeance. Visions she had buried deep now clawed to the surface. Flames devouring the Alpha's throne, blood staining the snow under a crimson moon. They would raise the court to silence her, dragging her back as a trophy or a sacrifice. Fear coiled in her gut, but beneath it, a spark ignited, the inner fire of her gift, warming her veins like embers stirred to life. She stepped forward, the robe whispering against her skin, her bare feet silent on the marble. "They come for me," she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her soul. "I won't hide like prey." Draven's gaze sharpened, assessing her not as chattel, but as an equal in the storm. The amulet pulsed brighter, syncing with the quickened beat of her heart, as if the moon itself bridged their worlds. "Then we face them together," he replied, no trace of command in his tone, only a quiet resolve that mirrored her own defiance. He tossed her the cloak from the bed, its lunar threads shimmering as it settled over her shoulders, heavy with the weight of forgotten oaths. She drew it close, the fabric a shield against the chill of betrayal seeping through the walls. They moved as one through the labyrinthine corridors, the court's eternal night alive with the clamor of awakening guards. Torchlight danced on armored walls, casting elongated shadows that twisted like specters of old wars. The air grew thick with the metallic bite of drawn steel and the distant guttural howls echoing from the mountains, shifter cries laced with vampiric snarls, a profane union born of greed. Ilara's senses sharpened. The winds howl through arrow slits carrying scents of pine, blood, and burning pitch. Her visions flickered at the edges, a clash of claws and fangs under the blood moon, a choice between slaughter and surrender. In the grand hall, where crystal chandeliers hung like frozen tears, Draven rallied his kin, pale nobles with eyes like polished garnets, their silken gowns stained with the night's anticipations. But it was Ilara who felt the shift, her empathy weaving through the tension like moonlight on water. These vampires were not the monsters of pack tales. They were guardians of a brittle truce, their immortality a curse of endless vigilance. Draven stood at the forefront, his presence a bastion against the encroaching roar. Yet she saw the melancholy in his stance. The guilt of past raids, the Omega he had spared now haunting him as a symbol of his weakness. What is strength, she wondered, if not choosing alliance over isolation? Her hand brushed his arm as she took position beside him, the contact electric, sending warmth through the cloak's threads. He glanced at her, surprise yielding to a bond forged in shared peril, instinctive yet resisted, curiosity blooming into trust. The assault came at the outer gates, a symphony of violence under the paling sky. Shifters in fur-mantled armor crashed against the iron, their alpha's banner, a snarling wolf on crimson, a taunt to the court's sovereignty. Vesper's vampires slithered from the flanks, shadows with fangs, betraying their own for promises of shifter lands. Draven led the charge onto the battlements, his sword a silver arc in the torchlight, while Ilara clung to the walls, her visions guiding her whispers. To the left, the breach widens. Her fire stirred, manifesting as a subtle glow in her palms, warding off a lunging wolf hybrid with a burst of inner heat that singed fur and drew a yelp. In the fray, empathy deepened into something visceral. Draven fought with lethal precision, but spared a young shifter pup caught in the melee, his blade halting inches from the boy's throat. "Go," he growled, voice thick with the echo of his own regrets. Ilara watched, heart aching with recognition. The mercy that had cost him allies, now mirrored in her own refusal to let hatred consume her. A rival fang lunged at her from the shadows, its claws raking the air, but Draven was there, his body a shield, the amulet flaring as he dispatched the traitor. Their eyes met amid the blood and snowmelt, the bond solidifying. Not love, not yet, but a refuge woven from mutual wounds where fear gave way to fierce loyalty. As the attackers retreated into the storm, howling curses to the wind, the court stood scarred but unbreached. Dawn's first light crept over the peaks, gilding the spires in reluctant gold. Ilara leaned against the battlement, breath ragged, the cloak bloodied at its hem, a symbol of their fragile sanctuary. Draven sheathed his sword, his hand lingering near hers, the touch unspoken, but electric. In that breathless pause, the divide blurred further, empathy transforming into a tether against the gathering darkness. Yet doubt lingered in her soul. Could redemption bloom from such shadowed soil, or would it demand a price steeper than blood? The moon faded, but its secrets lingered, whispering of revelations yet to come. The pale light of dawn seeped through the battlements like a reluctant intruder, gilding the blood-streaked snow below in hues of tarnished gold. Ilara's breath came in shallow waves, the metallic tang of the fray still clinging to her tongue, mingling with the acrid smoke from smoldering torches. Her hands trembled as she gripped the stone parapet, the cloak's frayed edges damp with melt and ichor. Its lunar threads dulled, but unyielding, a stubborn reminder of the wilds she had fled. The attackers' howls faded into the wind's mournful dirge, leaving the court in a hush, broken only by the labored rasps of the wounded and the distant drip of thawing frost. Draven stood beside her, his chest rising and falling in a rhythm that mimicked life, though his eyes held the endless depth of night. The amulet at his throat gleamed faintly, its silver crescent sinking with the subtle pulse in her veins, as if the moon had etched their fates into matching scars. He had shielded her without hesitation, his body interposing like a vow unspoken, and now that fierce loyalty lingered in the air between them, thick as the fog rolling from the peaks. Yet Ilara recoiled inwardly, rationalizing the warmth blooming in her chest as mere adrenaline's deceit. He was vampire, eternal thief of breath, She, a discarded Omega whose visions had branded her a curse. Trust was a fragile thing, easily shattered like the ice cracking underfoot. "Come," he said softly, his voice a low rumble that cut through the dawn's chill, extending a hand gloved in dark leather, stained with the night's toll. No command laced his tone, only that quiet melancholy, the weight of centuries pressing on his shoulders like an unseen crown. Ilara hesitated, her fingers brushing the cloak's hem, then placed her palm in his, cool yet steady, sending a jolt through her like fire meeting frost. Together they descended the winding stairs into the court's underbelly, where the air grew heavier, laced with the scent of damp stone and ancient herbs burned to staunch wounds. The healing chambers lay deep within, a warren of vaulted rooms lit by braziers of glowing embers, their flames casting elongated shadows that danced like restless spirits. Vampiric healers moved with spectral grace, tending to the fallen with salves of silverleaf and vials of shadowed elixir, their faces etched with the same guarded resolve as their prince. Ilara's empathy swelled unbidden, weaving through the pain. A guard with a gash across his throat, whispering of lost kin. A noblewoman cradling a shattered arm, her eyes distant with the echo of betrayal. These were not the soulless predators of pack lore. They bled, they grieved, bound by pacts as fragile as her own severed bonds. Draven led her to an alcove veiled by heavy tapestries embroidered with thorny roses under crimson moons, the fabric whispering as they parted. "Sit," he urged, guiding her to a low bench carved from obsidian, its surface smooth as forgotten tears. She obeyed, the cloak pooling around her like spilled moonlight, exhaustion tugging at her limbs. But as he knelt to examine a shallow cut on her forearm, inflicted by a stray claw in the melee, something stirred within her, deeper than fatigue. The inner fire, that spark alphas had feared as witchcraft, flickered to life, warming her blood like a hearth against the encroaching cold. It began as a whisper, a vision uncoiling in her mind's eye. Not the fragmented glimpses of her past, but a tapestry vivid and unrelenting. She saw Draven enthroned in the great hall, his crown a circlet of frozen thorns, but shadows encroached. Lord Vesper's fangs twisting into serpents, coiling around the throne, while shifter alphas howled at the gates, their eyes burning with the same golden fury that had rejected her. Blood pooled at his feet, not his own, but hers, staining the marble in rivulets that formed lunar phases. And at the center, the amulet blazed, drawing her hand to it, binding their fates in a web of silver and sorrow. The prophecy sharpened. She was the pathfinder, the Omega whose sight could unravel the betrayals weaving through the courts, or doom them all if ignored. Ilara gasped, her free hand flying to her temple as the vision gripped her, the fire manifesting outwardly, a soft glow emanating from her skin, illuminating the alcove in ethereal blue. The air hummed with latent power, the braziers flaring brighter, casting her shadow tall and wavering against the wall. Draven froze, his hand still on her arm, the coolness of his touch grounding the surge. His stormy eyes widened, not in fear, but in dawning recognition, the amulet at his throat pulsing in rhythm with her glow, its runes awakening like stars piercing the veil. "You," he breathed, the word laced with awe and the sharp edge of destiny's blade. He released her gently, rising to his full height, but his gaze never left her face, searching the depths as if reading an ancient scroll. The seer. The pack's whispers were true, not curse, but gift, the amulet. It has not stirred like this since the founding oaths. His voice cracked, the melancholy fracturing into something raw, vulnerable. Guilt shadowed his features, memories of the Omega he had spared years ago resurfacing, the one whose mercy had ignited this war, now mirrored in Ilara's light. She was no stray. She was the key, the lunar thread to mend the frayed packs between shifter wilds and vampiric night. Her visions the map to redemption or ruin. Alara pulled back, the glow fading as quickly as it had come, leaving her chilled and exposed. "It's not a gift," she whispered, voice trembling with the weight of revelation. "It's why they cast me out, why they hunt me still. Visions of fire and fall, of thrones crumbling under blood moons. If I stay, I'll bring your court to ashes." Denial surged, rationalizing the bond as peril's illusion. Yet the fire lingered in her core, sinking with the amulet's warmth, pulling her toward him like gravity's inexorable call. Draven stepped closer, his presence a bastion against her doubt, fingers tracing the air near her cheek without touching. "Then let it burn true. Eldrath teeters on betrayal's edge. Vesper's alliance with your Alpha poisons the borders, unraveling centuries of truce. Your sight. It reveals what my blood cannot. You are the revelation, Alara, the Omega, born to illuminate the wounds we both carry." His words hung heavy, philosophical in their tragedy. What is destiny, if not the courage to embrace the fire that scars? Empathy deepened between them, her resistance cracking under the shared burden, the cloak's threads shimmering as if the goddess herself nodded approval. Outside, the dawn strengthened, painting the spires in reluctant light, while distant wivu echoed from the passes, a prelude to greater storms. Ilara met his gaze, the vision's echoes whispering of choices yet to unfold, to flee her gift, or wield it as a blade against the shadows encroaching on them both. The bond solidified, no longer mere curiosity, but a tether forged in Revelation's forge, resisted still, but undeniable, like the moon's pull on the tide. In that suspended moment, as embers crackled and secrets unfurled, Draven saw her not as salvation's prize, but as the equal who could crown his guilt with mercy or condemn it to eternal night. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. The grand hall of Eldrath thrummed with the pulse of restrained fury, its vaulted arches echoing the distant rumble of thunder rolling in from the Iron Fang peaks. Torchlight flickered across walls veined with obsidian and silver, casting the assembled nobles in stark relief, pale faces etched with suspicion, eyes like garnets glinting in the perpetual twilight. Ilara stood at the threshold, the cloak's lunar threads heavy against her shoulders, absorbing the chill that seeped from the stone like the breath of forgotten graves. The revelation of her gift still burned in her veins, a fire that had illuminated Draven's gaze but left her soul scorched with doubt. She was no queen in waiting. She was the spark that could ignite the powder keg of old wounds, her visions a mirror to the court's unraveling oaths. Draven moved ahead, his crimson cloak swirling like congealed blood, the amulet at his throat a beacon in the gloom. His presence commanded silence, yet Alara sensed the fracture beneath, guilt coiling tighter with each step, the weight of his past mercy now a chain linking him to her fate. The hall parted before them, revealing a dais where the High Council gathered, ancient bloodlords in robes of midnight silk, their fingers adorned with rings forged from shifter bones, symbols of pacts long betrayed. At the center sat Lord Vesper, the traitor whose alliance with the Ironfang Alpha had poisoned the borders, his smile a slash of ivory against skin like polished marble. Flanking him were envoys from the pack, hulking figures in fur-trimmed leathers, their golden eyes feral under the crimson moon's watchful gaze. The Alpha himself loomed among them, Thorn, his rejection of Alara a scar that festered into this confrontation, his broad frame radiating the raw power of the wilds. The air thickened with scents, the earthy musk of shifters clashing against the metallic tang of vampiric eternity, overlaid with the faint smoke of braziers burning lunar herbs to invoke the goddess's indifferent judgment. Alara's heart hammered, a solitary drum against the symphony of whispers as memories clawed upward. Thorns snarl in the snow, the pack's howls sealing her exile. Her visions dismissed as omens of weakness. She had been broken then, left to the mountain's mercy. Now she stood on the precipice of their reckoning, the fire within her stirring like embers fanned by fate's cruel wind. "Prince Draven," Thorn growled, his voice a rumble that vibrated through the marble, eyes locking on Alara with predatory gleam. "You harbor a fugitive, a seer who poisoned our bloodlines with her lies. Hand her over, and we may yet salvage the truce your father bled for." His pack shifted restlessly, claws flexing, the scent of pine and aggression wafting forward like a challenge. Vesper leaned back, his fingers steepled, amusement curling his lips. He had woven this web, promising the Alpha Alara's head in exchange for shifter armies to topple Draven's throne. Draven halted at the dais' edge, his stance unyielding, but Alara caught the tremor in his jaw, the melancholy deepening as ghosts of his own past rose. Years ago, in a border raid, he had spared an Omega much like her, letting her flee with whispers of mercy that now fueled Thorn's rage. That act, born of ethical restraint, had branded him weak in the court's eyes, a wound that mirrored her rejection. "The truce dies with betrayal, not with truth," Draven replied, his tone measured, laced with the sorrow of one who had seen too many dawns bleed into night. "Alara is no pawn. Her visions expose your alliance, Vesper, the shadows you cast to claim my crown." Murmurs rippled through the hall, nobles shifting like leaves in a gathering storm. Vesper rose, his movements fluid as spilled ink, eyes narrowing on the amulet that pulsed brighter, syncing with Alara's quickened breath. "Visions? From a discarded Omega? You cling to fairy tales, boy, while the real world howls at your gates." He gestured sharply, and chains rattled from the shadows, captured shifters and vampires alike. Pawns in his game, their bloodied forms, a visceral reminder of the war's cost. One, a young vampiress with torn wings of shadow, met Alara's gaze, pleading silently for the mercy Draven embodied. The fire ignited then, unbidden, surging through Alara like liquid moonlight. Her vision unfurled in the hall's center, projected not in her mind, but woven into the air, a spectral tapestry of silver threads. Thorn's throne crumbling under fangs and claws, Vesper's serpentine betrayal coiling around Eldrath's spires, blood rivers flowing under a blood moon until only two figures remained, Draven and her, hands clasped over the amulet, mending the fractured world or dooming it to ash. The hall gasped, the projection's glow illuminating faces in ethereal blue, the lunar cloak billowing as if kissed by spectral wind. Thorn lunged forward, fury twisting his features, but Draven's sword flashed, halting him inches from her throat. "Enough!" Alara's voice cut through the chaos, steady despite the quake in her soul. The fire warmed her skin, a glow that warded the Alpha's advance. Her empathy extending like tendrils to touch the wounds in the room, the pack's fear of her gift, Vesper's ambition born of envy, Draven's guilt, a chasm she alone could bridge. "This is no conquest," she said, eyes locking with Thorn's, the past's sting sharpening her words. "You rejected me for seeing your fall, but exile forged this strength. Vesper promises power, yet delivers chains. What is freedom, if not choosing forgiveness over the blade?" Thorn hesitated, golden eyes flickering with doubt, the pack's howls faltering into uneasy silence. Vesper snarled, summoning shadows that lashed like whips, but Draven met them with a burst of ancient rune light from the amulet, the clash sending sparks across the stone. Alara stepped between them, the moral crux tearing at her. Flee to liberty's wild embrace, abandoning this bond to war's maw, or embrace the love budding in Draven's stormy gaze, redemption's fragile crown, demanding she forgive the Alpha who broke her and wage peace over vengeance. Her hand reached for Draven's, the contact electric, fire meeting frost in a blaze that steadied them both. Resistance crumbled. The pull was no illusion, but a choice, Love as proof, not prize, healing the guilt that shadowed his steps. Vesper struck then, a dagger of poisoned shadow arcing toward her heart, but Thorn intercepted, his claws rending the traitor's arm in a spray of ichor. "No more lies," the Alpha rumbled, turning to Draven with weary resolve. "The seer speaks truth. End this alliance, or face the pack's full wrath." The hall erupted in clamor, guards clashing with Vesper's loyalists, blood slicking the floors in crimson arcs that mirrored the moon's hue. Alara clung to Draven amid the fray, her visions guiding strikes, mercy for the redeemable, justice for the fallen. As the confrontation peaked in a whirlwind of fangs, claws, and philosophical fire, what is power, if not the grace to forgive the betrayer at your feet? As Vesper fled into the shadows, wounded and cursing, the hall fell to exhausted quiet, the air heavy with the scent of singed fur and spilled eternity. Thorn met Alara's gaze one last time, a nod of reluctant absolution passing between them, rejection transmuted into alliance, her brokenness the forge of his humility. Draven pulled her close, his arm a shield against the lingering storm, the amulet warm between them like a shared heartbeat. Yet the choice lingered, a spiritual dilemma etched in her soul. Had she chosen love's tether, or merely delayed war's inevitable toll? The moon watched from the slits above, silent witness to the Renascimento teetering on forgiveness's edge as blood and fire whispered of sacrifices yet to come. The blood moon hung low over Eldrath's spires, its crimson glow bleeding into the dawn like a wound that refused to close, casting the grand hall in hues of rust and reluctant gold. Ilara's breath steadied amid the settling dust, the air thick with the coppery reek of ichor and the acrid bite of scorched stone, where braziers still smoldered like dying hearts. The cloak clung to her frame, its lunar threads stained with the night's toll, a tapestry of frayed silver now woven with threads of redemption, heavy as the choices pressing against her ribs. Vesper's flight had shattered the fragile stasis, leaving the hall a battlefield of fractured alliances, shifters and vampires alike nursing wounds, their eyes flickering between wariness and weary hope. Thorn's nod lingered in her mind, a grudging absolution that mended nothing but cracked the armor of her exile, revealing the raw ache beneath. Draven's arm remained around her, a cool anchor in the chaos, his touch no longer resisted, but embraced in the quiet that followed the storm. The amulet between them pulsed with a shared rhythm, its silver crescent warm against her skin where she had claimed it from his throat, fingers trembling as if holding the moon itself. Guilt shadowed his stormy eyes still, etched deeper by the mercy he had extended to the redeemed Alpha, mirroring the ethical fractures that had defined his rule. He was no unbroken king. His melancholy was a crown of thorns, pricked by centuries of blood oaths that demanded sacrifice over sentiment. Yet in her, he saw the cure, not a balm, but a fire to cauterize the wounds, her visions the light that pierced his eternal night. Alara pulled back slightly, meeting his gaze, the fire within her flickering like embers in a hearth long cold. The revelation of her gift had unbound them both, but freedom tasted bittersweet, laced with the spiritual weight of what lay ahead. "This truce," she whispered, voice raw from the fray's cries, "it's built on sand. Vesper will return with shadows deeper than these halls, and Thorn's pack hungers for more than peace. My visions. They show no easy dawn." The words hung between them, philosophical thorns. What is Renascimento, if not the willingness to bleed for the light that follows darkness? Her hand lingered on the amulet, its runes glowing faintly, syncing with the distant weavos echoing from the peaks, shifters retreating, but not defeated, their howls a dirge for the wilds scarred by betrayal. Draven's fingers traced the cloak's edge, brushing her arm with a tenderness born of shared despair, the contact sending warmth through her veins like blood meeting flame. "Then we forge it in fire," he murmured, his tone laced with the melancholy of one who had lost too many to duty's blade. "I've carried this guilt like a shroud. The Omega I spared, the packs I bent for mercy's sake. It weakened me, they said, but you prove it was the path." His eyes held hers, stormy depths yielding to a vulnerability that cracked her resistance fully. Love was no immediate blaze. It had simmered in denial, rationalized as survival's tether, but now it bloomed as proof, redemption's slow burn, healing the fractures of rejection and regret. She felt it in the wind's sigh through the arrow slits, carrying scents of pine and thawing snow, a sensory promise of worlds bridged. Yet the choice loomed, moral and visceral, tearing at her core like claws on frozen earth. To unite with him meant sacrifice, her visions unbound, guiding Eldrath through wars that would demand her blood as much as his, the Omega's fire fueling a throne that blurred the lines between life and undeath. Freedom whispered from the mountains, a solitary path where she could wander unmarked, her gift a private curse rather than a crown's burden. Faith warred with despair in her soul, the goddess's indifferent gaze watching from the moon's fading arc. Draven sensed her turmoil, stepping closer until their breaths mingled, hers warm and ragged, his cool and eternal, the amulet bridging the divide like a heartbeat shared. In that suspended breath, Elara chose, not for destiny's iron hand, but for the liberty found in compassion's embrace. She lifted the amulet, pressing it to his chest, the silver warming against his skin as her fire surged, a soft glow enveloping them both. Visions cascaded then, not of ruin, but renewal. Borders redrawn in silver oaths, shifters and vampires standing under a mended moon, blood spilled not in vengeance, but to seal pacts of mutual healing. Thorn's pack integrating at the edges, Vesper's shadows banished to the void. And at the center, their union. A queen not born of fang or claw, but of the empathy that had forged her from exile's ashes. The hall stirred around them, nobles and envoys alike witnessing the light, murmurs rising like prayers to the lunar divine. Draven drew her into his arms fully, the embrace a union of frost and flame, his lips brushing her temple in a kiss that tasted of ancient vows and newfound peace. "By dawn, you are my queen," he whispered, voice thick with emotion, the words a renacimento etched in the air. No tragedy lingered unresolved. This was the cure, her brokenness mending his guilt, their love the ethical triumph over power's cold grasp. The cloak billowed as a gust swept through, its threads shimmering like stars reclaimed, symbol of the Omega who had collapsed at death's door only to rise as the heart of an empire reborn. As the blood moon yielded to the sun's first true rays, gilding the spires in golden fire, Elara felt the weight lift, not erased, but transmuted. The wind carried no more howls of pursuit, only the soft hush of snow melting into spring's promise. In Draven's hold, she found not reward, but the profound proof of redemption. Every rejected soul a potential healer, every wounded king a canvas for mercy's art. The amulet rested between them, pulsing softly, a beacon against the gathering light, as the court knelt in silent witness to their intertwined fates, love as the ultimate choice, weaving despair into destiny's enduring flame. If your heart beat alongside ours, comment and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.